Thank you for coming this afternoon. Special hello to all the folks that just got off the State Council meeting. This afternoon, we have Andy Bunn, who will be giving us an update on the Hawaii Conference Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate it. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm going to share my screen because I have a few slides to share with you all. So you have all arrived at the update from the Hawaii Conference Foundation for 2022. I'm going to give you today a brief introduction of the foundation for those of you who may not be fully familiar with what we do. Then going to talk about the foundation's current assets and holdings. And then I'll talk a bit about some of the current issues, some of the things that we've been working on that have been of concern, that sort of thing, including expenses and drawn on investments, which has been an ongoing topic. Craigside 3 situation, our office building status, some thoughts about understanding our portfolio and our holdings, and finally, if we have some time, I'll talk about some specific properties which you all might find interesting. So the Hawaii Conference Foundation is the asset and property management arm of the Hawaii Conference. We are a Hawaii nonprofit corporation. We are separately incorporated and in existence from the Hawaii Conference, which is also a Hawaii nonprofit corporation. And the foundation is a tax-exempt charity pursuant to Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. That's the best status you can have as a exempt nonprofit charitable organizations. It means that people can donate monies to you and take tax deductions. The purpose of the foundation is pretty straightforward. It's to receive and administer funds and securities and other property for the purpose of advancing the mission of the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ and its successors, including its churches and ministers, through the management of custodial accounts and otherwise, other assets and actions. And very generally, our mission is to advance the cause of Christian religion in such other manner as may deem suitable under the circumstances. How do we advance the cause of Christian religion? We advance the cause of Christian religion by promoting the interests and welfare of the conference, its churches, its ministers, and of the General Synod and other instrumentalities of the United Church of Christ and affiliated institutions, insofar as their interests are within an area of concern for the Hawaii Conference. Why was the foundation created? At the 1968 Aha Pae, the foundation was born, and reasons for its creation were among the following. Grew out of a desire to separate the money and spending functions of the conference from the fiduciary role of money management. This is the balance of the program versus the purse. There was a desire to refine and improve the investment functions and activities of the conference. There was also a desire to provide maximum protection of the assets from operational functions. In other words, the various other departments of the conference. There was also a desire to ensure that the assets are stewarded for wider mission consideration, including the needs of associations and other churches, and especially the needs of neighbor island churches, and that those assets would be invested for their futures as well. There was a thought at the time that it would also provide a vehicle that would be a little more, allow us to provide more autonomous services in a trust capacity for our churches. And finally, there was a desire to instill confidence among and to attract traditional and potential donors to the conference and improve giving towards endowment. So looking at the assets of the foundation today, as of March 31, at any rate, the close of our last financial quarter, the foundation was roughly a $69.7 million institution. That's inclusive of custodial accounts we hold for churches and associations and the conference. The net assets amount to $47.7 million. We invest those monies, and our investment holdings amount presently to a total of $56.1 million. How do we invest it? Well, about 30%. Well, let me break down the types of funds we hold. About 30% of the funds we hold are unrestricted funds for the foundation. Those are funds that can be used for any operational purpose. About 7% of our holdings, roughly 4 million, consist of custodial and restricted funds held specifically for the conference. So they're restricted uses for the conference and, for example, scholarship funds. 5% of our holdings consist of restricted funds held for other churches, different scholarships and other purposes. About 29% of our holdings are endowment funds. Those are funds where the corpus cannot be spent and the income is restricted for donor specified purposes. And finally, 29%, roughly 16.1 million now, are custodial funds, and those are funds that we invest on behalf of others, specifically our churches, and as well as several of our associations. The investment allocation, how we spread that, we invest the funds in a diversified way so that we can take advantage of positive markets, but we're protected somewhat from negative markets. About 55.6% of our investment portfolio are invested in domestic equities. And you can see the percentages there, the type of equities. They're about 38% into large cap, 6.3 into mid cap, 5.3 into small cap, and about 5.2 into sort of mixed investments. 5.7% are invested in international equities. Those are companies, foreign companies, funds that help hold those. 14.3% of our assets are held in fixed income, so bonds and annuities, investments which give a fixed return. And 22% are in an alternative investments, a structured note investment, which sort of straddles the difference between the equities markets and the fixed income markets, and allows us some advantages, but in a more prudent and safer way. They've been very good for us. And finally, presently hold about 2.5% of our portfolio in cash equivalent assets. In terms of market performance, boy, it's been a year. The financial markets, as if anybody's been reading the paper at all or watching the news, are really volatile at the moment. In December of 2021, we actually hit an all-time high. The calendar year portfolio return for us at that point was 14.77%, and that comfortably outpaced the benchmarks which we use to track the success of our investments. Through March 31, however, through the close of the last quarter, we've seen a very different market situation. The portfolio was down for the quarter about 4.8%, and down for the fiscal year about 0.2%. But at that point, it still remained positive for the last 12 months by 4.67%. Now, the equities market is suffering the worst quarter since the pandemic-induced crash in 2020 due to the war in Ukraine, supply chain issues, inflation, the lingering COVID concerns, and the bond market being challenged by the rising interest rate environment. And we expect and have seen over the last 2 months since the quarter end continued volatility in the short term. Now, I remind you that our investment strategy is geared for long-term horizons. And since the inception of our investment portfolio and program, And for the markers for the 3, 5, 7, and 10-year return lookbacks, returns have exceeded 8% for investment portfolio. In terms of the looking at it graphically for the fiscal year to date, you can see, you can see that the sort of the gradual rise towards December of 2021, and then the volatility, the drop off in the market in the first quarter, and as I said, we're likely to see continued drop off for the second quarter as well, given the way things are going economically. A significant portion of our holdings are in real estate. By and large, very little of that is invested for gain. But overall, we have about 160 parcels now that are owned, leased, or managed by the Hawaii Conference Foundation, and that's measured by the state tax map key numbers. So the state will issue a tax map key for a lot, or for a condominium unit, or a discrete piece of real estate. So 160 tax map key parcels that the foundation controls. 60 of those are church properties by institutional count, 36 active churches by my present count, and 24 inactive, in some cases long inactive, decades. Acreage wise, we have about 2,600 acres statewide, and I have to make a comment about that. In my report last year, we had a higher figure, and the reason for that was when I went in to look at the county websites which show interest, it was reflecting all of Kalapapa and some significant Bishop Estate parcels where we have a church and we own the improvements, but we don't own the underlying land. So that number got inflated in my report last year. So 2,600 looks to be a more accurate number. But by no means are we the largest landowner in Hawaii or anything close to it. I've heard people tell me that, and it's not true. The book value of the real estate we have is carried roughly at the moment at about 17 million. That's before depreciation. And the tax assessed values, if you were simply to go look it up on the county tax websites, is added up, is about 300 million, but that's overinflated because there's significant limitations on value to our properties related to church use restrictions, cemetery use, some non-conforming and landlocked parcels, and that sort of things which detract from value. Looking at our real estate, of the non-Craigside properties, Craigside is our condominium project up here in the uanu. Approximately 25% of the properties we have are held in trust for churches, and about another 20% would be in an implied trust arrangement, which I'll talk about later. Only 8% of those properties are income producing. That means 92% of all of that is non-income producing. And even if you throw all the Craigside units into the count, 35% of the holdings, the real estate holdings of the foundation, are income producing, and fully 65% are non-income producing. And that's one of the biggest challenges the foundation has had since its inception, is that is a lot of non-income producing land, and it costs money to hold land, to pay for its insurance, to pay for the applicable taxes, to pay for maintenance and care, and all of that. So that's a constant challenge for the foundation. Coming to some of our current issues, we've talked in prior years about the draw on investments, and you've heard Reverend Dr. Popham talk about that as well. This graph you will have recognized from prior talks, but it shows the average market values against the net draws over the last roughly 10 years. And it's higher than where we need to be, where we should be. On average, it's been around 8%, and we need to be closer to 6%. So yeah, this is the slide here. The average draw over the last 10 years on the combined unrestricted and endowment funds basis was over 8%. And this was because in the past, a prioritization of both conference program need and the need to meet escalating property maintenance expenses. And that's a rate of draw that is not sustainable over the long term. The target draw, what we call the safe draw, using proper fiduciary standards imposed on us by law, and is about 4.5%. The foundation could probably spend all of our assets and available unrestricted funds on property maintenance and doing cool stuff with that, but we need to continue to support the conference program, which is our, primary purpose. Just looking at this year, our budgeted draw is 6.82%, and our actual expected because of some savings we've received this year is closer to 5%. So in order to address, and we talked about this last year as well, but it bears repeating, we have a plan to get ourselves on a continued track of drawing less and yet providing good support for the conference. So we had a multi-year approach to whittling down our draw so that the conference didn't have to go cold turkey on their budget, but they would still have monies to support itself. So that involves reducing expenses, and the conference and the foundation have been pretty good about reducing expenses, including last year, staff taking multiple furlough days to ensure that we were as lean as we could be. We have also been seeking to improve income generation. You can only cut expenses so much. So where you can improve income generation, that's really where you're going to get saved institutionally. We want to build up the corpus enough so that the operational expenses and the transfers to the conference can be funded from our income. That's the goal. We're not there yet, but we're tracking in the right direction. We also talked about having a capital campaign that is still being planned. As some of you may have seen, it will be a bit scaled back from our originally planned capital campaign. We had a feasibility study completed this year that concluded that the foundation and the conference can sustain a capital campaign, but not at the scale that we had originally contemplated. So planning for that campaign still resides with the foundation trustees and the conference council, and there will be more of that in the future. And finally, in terms of future budgeting, we continue to budget for de-escalating draws, smaller draw percentages from our anticipated available funds. So in terms of the draw expenses and draw on investments this year, we budgeted for operating revenues of about 1.7 million, transfers to the conference of about roughly 550,000, and operating expenses of about 2 million, which means our draw on investments was budgeted at about 865,000. Looking forward, we're projecting a lesser draw, happily. We've been able to reduce operating expenses, and even despite the fact that the markets are down, the budget looks pretty good this year. Just for your information, operating expenses include the salaries and benefits, travel for meetings, professional and consulting fees, materials and supplies, equipment leases, support for the mission of the foundation and the conference, and rental operating expenses at Craigside and other properties. Graphically looking at our draw versus budget, you can see that it is trending downward, and that since 2019, when we first really identified these issues and started a conscientious plan to to put things on a better track, we've been able to keep our draw below budget for 2019, 2020, 2021, and it appears to be 2022 will be in line as well. So that's a trend that we do hope to preserve. That's the goal, and we're working towards it. So one of the properties that we are looking to convert to a better return on investment is Craigside, the tower at Craigside 3, sometimes known as 21 Craigside, because that's its physical address. The project was intended originally both as an investment and a mission property. As an investment property, it's not performed well in recent years. As a mission property, it really has come to meet the needs of only a very small handful of people, and it comes with a very large carrying cost. The building is over 60 years old, it's aging, and maintenance costs are on the rise. And it has been very challenging to have a building that's within a larger condominium project, and so therefore controlled by a condominium board and not controlled by the foundation. So it has regrettably delayed, I think, important decisions that needed to be made relating to capital improvements and keeping the place maintained. And we think in the long term, it's better for the foundation to have an asset that it controls directly for investment purposes. Because of all those factors, as an investment, Craigside has had a negative net income for many, many years. This means that we are not recouping, the rental income is not recouping the expenses of ownership related there. So the board has voted to sell the units in Craigside so that we can reinvest those proceeds and get better benefit for the conference and for our mission. There are 6 mission units that we've set aside for the moment to retain, potentially for future mission uses that may involve the need to own a condominium unit. The long-term details of that have yet to be determined, but we've set those aside just so that we have a few units left. The initial plan for the sales of the units was slow, but market conditions this year have changed very significantly. So we've moved into a much faster pace of sales to take advantage of favorable market conditions. And those conditions are, for the moment, as the market changes so fast, but for the moment, the demand is very high for these unit types. And we are still seeing record high real estate prices. So it's a great time to be selling, even with the present interest rate increases taking place. The window is still very good. The interest rate environment is changing, so we don't know how much longer this window is going to last, but at the moment, people are still buying. And on the other side of the coin, in terms of the reinvestment opportunities, the capital markets, the stock markets that I talked about with our investment pool, are down significantly. So it's not a bad time to take assets that are in real estate and still trading at market highs and be putting it into the capital markets where we're seeing some lows or a significant dip taking place. So that's where we are. In terms of the sales to date, now this is information that is all public. It's on the public listing agreement and sales. So I can share with you that we've sold 12 units. We've listed those units for, in the aggregate, about $5 million. And the closing prices for those units were above $5 million, by about $65,000. So in all but, I think, 3 cases, we've sold our units for higher than our asking price. And we also had multiple offers on individual units. So it's still suggesting to us that the demand is good, and the timing is right. So we want to take advantage of this while we can. Turning to another important property for the foundation, our office building at 1848 New Uanu Avenue has grown too large for us. We're going to believe the conference staff has grown smaller over the years, and our building simply is too big for our needs. So we've identified that a joint committee of the foundation and the conference, known as the 1848 Committee, looked at options for the office building and recommended that a sale or lease of the entirety of the building to another user and relocation to a less expensive office property would be in the best interest of the conference and the foundation. So that's what we're in the process of doing. The office building was listed this year for $5.75 million. We've had many tours and inspections of the building since then. We're still in our marketing phase and talking to some parties about acquisition of the property. We've also in the interim used the time to address some significant maintenance concerns. We had a re-roofing project. We recoated our metal roof and replaced all the flat roofs. We fixed spalling. We did a number of other largely exterior repairs and some interior maintenance issues. And we are looking at some options for relocation. The office market downtown is very good for rental right now. There's a lot of vacancies, so largely looking at space downtown. We are also talking to looking at potential local church campus relocation options as well. Most likely, because I think it will take a lot more time to work out local church campus options, we'll be moving downtown, at least for a brief period of time while we exhaust the local church campus options. So that'll be a new space, a new scene for our staff and for the conference to have us in a regular old office building. So other issues. So we're in the process at the Board of Trustees level of really trying to understand what we have and doing a really good property inventory. And really trying to understand what we have for purposes of refining and improving our future policies related to land holdings. But this is actually a screenshot of a Google map that identifies all of the foundation's properties, which we had created this year to help to be as a basis for a catalog that we can use. And that's still in development. We had a consultant who was funded actually by the pension boards, was kind enough to provide us with support to help have a professional consultant help us put this together, which is a great starting place for any of our discussions. So in terms of understanding what we have, I want to take just a sec to kind of outline kind of how we hold properties. So we have some properties are held in fee simple. That means there's outright ownership, no strings attached. Craigside Tower 3 is a great example of that. We have some other properties where we hold what's called the leasehold. So we are a lessee, where we don't own the land, but we are a long-term lessee. And for example, Hokuloa Church on the Big Island is on state land, and we have a long-term lease. Then we have another group of properties, pretty much the Craigside Towers 1 and 2, where we're the landlord, but we have given out long-term apartment leases. So those are leased fee ownership interests. And finally, we have a group of properties that we hold in trust. And the trust is where it's subject to specific terms that benefit a third party. And by and large, those are churches that we hold properties in trust for. And there's two types of trust, really, there's the explicit trust, that is, that there's a formal trust instrument. There's a document that was signed by the grantor creating the trust. In most of our cases, it's actually the deed itself that creates the trust. Campbell Park in Lahaina is a good example of that. And then we have a group of properties where there is an implied trust, where there's not a specific grant in the instrument, but at the time the property was given to the foundation, there was an understanding or policy at the time that we would be holding the property for the benefit of the local church or the third party. The Ha'ula Congregational Church is an example of that. So we look at properties kind of in two groups at the moment. And we're taking a fresh look at how we do this, but this is from our old sort of policy handbook. We have mission properties and we have other properties. The mission properties, what actually our handbook refers to as golden properties, are historic, heritage properties, legacy properties, ones that clearly have an important place in the history of the denomination or the state of Hawaii or the larger community at large. Uanu Church is a great example. Kamukapili is another example of churches that we hold, which would be golden. And really, any active mission property that we hold is considered golden. That is our primary purpose, is to support our local churches through the conference. So those active mission properties where we have active churches are golden properties, and our priority is making sure that that can continue. I have a caveat here that they must be sustainable. That's one of our challenges, is that in this day and age of shrinking church, not just locally, but nationally, many local churches are really having a tough go at it. And we need to be sure and find ways that that those churches, to the extent they want to continue to use the properties, can do so, can be sustainable and support themselves. So we don't have the wherewithal to support all of them indefinitely without some sustainability or rethinking of the model. The other properties, the non-mission type properties, we hold for a variety of purposes. We hold them for future mission purposes because the conference or the foundation board may see some future potential or possibility there. They may be held for appreciation and income. They may be swapped for more useful property that can be ascertained. And of course, the properties may be sold or leased for income purposes or disposed of to eliminate liabilities. So we're in the process, just the beginning of the process of taking a very fresh look at all of this. And this will be something that our board works on, we'll be working on next year and in the years to come. So some of the challenges we have, well, grave sites. We have many properties with old grave sites on them. In fact, most of the former church sites that we have contain adjacent burials, and we actually have some standalone burial sites. Some of them are very small. Some of them look like they were simply family burial sites over time, and because there's not within the proximity an old sanctuary site. So we continue to hold these, and we're needing to be looked at them, but they present challenges in care and upkeep and maintenance and the ability to use them. Maintenance of unused and underutilized properties is a constant problem. We're always chasing that just because of the number of properties we hold and how old so many of the properties are. Split ownership of properties. We have some within groupings of some of our churches. We have properties that are immediately adjacent to properties the foundation doesn't own, which may be used by a single group. For example, a local church may own its sanctuary building, but immediately next door, the foundation owns the parsonage. Why that is, I don't know. We have to get into the history of that, but it begs the discussion of really this should all be used as an assemblage and as a whole. And so we will be needing to have discussions with those local churches that might be affected by that situation, about how we can come together and kind of utilize the property in the best interest of the local church and as well as the conference. We have some landlocked properties. That means that there's no legal or physical access to them. So those present challenges that we need to resolve. We have many properties with use restrictions and reversionary rights. And by and large, the use restriction is for church use, which is not a problem when there's active church use going on. Great, we can meet that restriction all day long. But when the local churches cease to exist, can't sustain itself, and all of that, then we have some challenges in terms of what would be next for that property. And finally, we need to grapple with the question of historic versus historical. We have properties that are historic in that they have an importance of deep significance to the denomination, to the Hawaii Conference as a whole, or to even the larger community, the history of the Hawaii, the history of the nation, the history of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And we have properties which are historical. They have significance to perhaps a local area or to a family, or are simply just old. And so understanding that will help in trying to develop priorities for where we invest our limited assets to support and maintain properties in the future. So this is just a nutshell, and this is just my overview of kind of what I've been seeing for the last couple of years in terms of themes that come out of properties. So now I want to just talk a little bit about, well, I labeled it here some special properties. I mean, all the properties we hold are special, and properties are unique by their nature, so they're always special to someone. But I thought these were just, we worked on these this year, and they were kind of cool. So this is the Kipuka Punahoa property on the Big Island. This is land that was given to us out of by Reverend Titus Cone in 1882. He described this woodland and pasture property, and he left it to support mission work of the conference. It's about 922 acres on the Big Island, up going west up the slope from Hilo. And it is a rich, diverse habitat. The majority of the property is mixed ohia and koa, and it's really quite an amazing place. Now there is a kipuka in that property that is surrounded by the 1881 Mauna Loa lava flow. Kipuka is much older land. That kipuka is about 200 acres, and it's dated somewhere between 400 and 700 years old in terms of representative native habitat. So it's considered very pristine and a really terrific example of what existed a long time ago. Because this property is so special, the foundation has entered into an agreement with the Nature Conservancy to preserve and protect the habitat. The entire 922 acres is subject to a Nature Conservancy easement, but the focus is on the 200-acre kipuka, which the Nature Conservancy manages and has a conservation management plan. They also, with our consent, permit the folks at Hilo to use the property as a natural outdoor classroom, because it's such a good example of Native Hawaiian habitat. We're working also with not only with the Nature Conservancy, but with the Pu'a Foundation, which owns adjoining land, which it got from the foundation out of the 1990s reconciliation on more active cultural management of the property and opportunities there. The next property, which is kind of cool, is Ola'a Spring, sort of downslope from that same property, also cone land, is a 692 acre parcel, which contains a very robust spring, which since 1977 has the rights to use the water have been leased to the Hilo Board of Water Supply. It was originally the primary water source for the city of Hilo. After the Clean Water Act, however, Hilo uses a well instead for its primary source, but it maintains this access to the spring as a backup water supply. This is water, unfortunately, right now that is not used. It flows out of the spring and down through the streams and eventually into the Wailuku River and out to the ocean. And we think there's opportunities with respect to this water to put it to a better community use, since the Hilo Board of Water Supply is not essentially not doing anything with it at the moment. It could generate hydroelectricity, and it could do so, and some revenue for the Cone Trust, and it would allow continued use of the water even after hydroelectric generation for agricultural as well as drinking water purposes if those needs downslope are identified. So that's something we're working on, and again, it's a beautiful property and there's wonderful habitat around it. Another property, again, on the Big Island, giving the Big Island guys a shout out today, is Pu'u'anahulu Congregational Church. This is a property, it's about 2.5 acres, right on Belt Road in Pu'u'anahulu, that's near Waimea. Was purchased by the Hawaii Evangelical Association in 1916 for local church purposes, and was used essentially as a local church. And you can see an old historic picture here till about 1960. In 1960, the church ceased to be operational as a local church, and the property was leased to Dillingham Ranch for agricultural purposes, but Dillingham Ranch did preserve the chapel, which you see here. In 1985, the property was then leased to the Baptist Church for their local church purposes, which it used continuously until this year. Now, what happened this year is that we had identified a local UCC church that was houseless, as it were. The Waikoloa Marshallese Ministry had been looking for a place to establish their local church and to gather. And this property is centrally located for the congregants of the Waikoloa Marshallese Ministry. So we have now entered into agreement with that church to use this property as their local church. So we're excited to have been able to match a property which really was not in golden use, as it were, at the time, and been able to put it back into golden use for our local church. Ka'ahumanu Church, one of our iconic properties in the conference, celebrating, I think it's 190th anniversary this year. Its sanctuary building, a picture of which you see here, dates back to 1875, so it's 147 years old. But it is in need of renovation, very significant renovation, particularly the steeple. So we have been working with Kahuengiga and church leadership to develop plans for the renovation. Architects Hawaii has donated their services, in fact, of an historic restoration specialist to do detailed plans and specs for the renovation of that church. that we can take out to bid and get some hard numbers for the actual renovation. The church, as some of you may have heard earlier today in state council discussions, is undertaking a capital campaign to raise $2 million to effect these renovations. As much as possible, the foundation is trying to support the church in these efforts. We've been helping to coordinate a refinancing of the church's debt with Cornerstone Fund, as well as to allow more borrowing capacity, and have offered to provide support related to their grant writing or their grant management activities. So an important property that is in need of some attention, and certainly on the preservation list, and one which we're working towards hopefully a successful conclusion. We'd love to get this property fixed up. Hokuloa Church, also on the Big Island. This one is in the Puako area. Its foundation goes back to Lorenzo Lyons in about 1858 or so, when the school was built on this property, and later a church building. The church remained active until about 1920, when most of the people in Puako had sort of moved out because of the closing of the sugar plantation there. Occasional services were held. The building was maintained by Iniloa Church for a long time, and used for incidental activities. In 1989, the conference made a concerted effort to fix the property up and reestablish church there, and made repairs to the building in the hope of establishing a new congregation, which has by and large succeeded. There is a new congregation and an independent local church that is happening here, and that's very exciting. In 2016, the foundation actually concluded a 65-year ground lease with the state of Hawaii to allow us to be here. This church is an example of a property where the church existed on the site for many, many years, but never held title to its own property. Neither the conference nor the church held the title. And though there may be arguments or a way to claim that we should hold title, the decision at the time was simply to get into a consensual relationship with the state, because the state was interested in preserving historic preservation of the building and the site for its historic value, and have a ground lease, which is what the situation is now. So we're assured of tenure and the right to be here for at least another 65 years. Related to that, the foundation got an SMA approval to open up the shoreline to remove some invasive halekoa and kiabi, which was clogging the bay, and it's beautiful. Now that it's open, you can see the church in all its glory, and you can see the view here from the church property out across the bay. Finally, last one, I just added this, and I haven't done all my research on it, but I just thought this was a cool property. West Hamakua, the church, or it's also known as Kukui Haile. There's an old church ruins with grave sites on it that has, which I call nature's church, because this banyan tree has completely taken over the walls of the church, but has followed the walls of the church in a very beautiful way. And you can see how the banyan roots have arched over the doorway. And you can see Kapu Jonathan Roach in the doorway there. But when we visited the site, it was kind of chicken skin. We do have a caretaker who lives on the property to keep that grass mowed and maintain the graves. But at the present time, sort of no regular mission use identified for this property. but I thought it was worth sharing because of the cool site. So that's it. Sorry if I'm long-winded, but I just wanted to give you guys a good sense of the foundation and where we are. And I will, this is my contact information. If you have follow-up questions or need to reach me, I welcome discussions with everybody. And so please do not hesitate to do so. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and open it up for questions.
First question in chat. Please give an example of a structured note.
Oh, a structured note is you're investing in, it's an investment which a blue chip AAA rated company will promise to pay you a return, which is based upon an index rate, like the S&P 500 or the Dow, or some guaranteed rate of return, but it's capped. So you can only get so much return out of it, and they're gambling on, you know, it might go more and they get the benefit of the bargain. We're gambling on, we get a return, but we're trading a cap on that return in exchange for a limitation of liability. If the note goes down, our liability is limited. There's also a floor on the note. So if the stocks plummet, then it's not like we're holding the stocks and we follow it all the way to the bottom. Our liability is limited. So it's a securities product which allows us to trade some upside return in exchange for protection on the downside.
Referring to 21 Craigside, what do you mean by the mission units and how are they used?
Right now, the mission units are occupied by renters, most of whom are renting it at a discounted rent, who are in service to the conference in some capacity, or who have been in service to the conference in some capacity. So we have a retired clergy person, we have a widow of a retired clergy person, we have several active clergy folks. Originally, the priority in housing at Craigside was to provide housing for clergy and retired clergy. Over the years, that expanded to provide housing for people who are working in our mission community. And in more recent years, that group actually got much more limited, and it was opened up to just general rentals over the years. But the mission units right now, the 6 that we've identified, are currently all occupied by folks who have some role in our larger conference mission. And in the future, you know, what we do with those in the future, we haven't determined yet, whether we continue an opportunity for rentals in that way, or whether it becomes a place for more transient rentals, we don't know, or whether we don't hold them at all because we'd rather just invest and create a different type of support program. We don't know yet there, but we've decided we wanted to set a few units aside so that we still had some opportunity to do things along those lines.
What are some proposed examples of reducing expenses?
Well, we're not going to travel so much. We're going to be doing we continue to be doing, you know, Zoom calls. One of the large expenses of the conference historically has been travel. So that's one area. You know, there will be, by the way, a budget discussion that I think it's tomorrow evening. So there will be opportunity to drill down a little bit about conference expenses. But yeah, I mean, it's wherever we can, trying to limit the cost of things, trying to look for the best price on things. really the bulk, the foundation expenses, a lot of them are very fixed in terms of taxes and insurance and that sort of thing. So the bulk of reduction of expenses has come out of the conference side of the budget. And for them, it means eliminating program, eliminating activity, eliminating staff positions, stuff that really hurts, but is necessary to do.
Who is the real estate company for the sales at Craigside?
Craigside, we're represented by Engel and Volkers Honolulu. The principal broker for us is Beth Worrell Daly. She's got about 30 years of experience in the residential market community. Engel Volkers has a strong local presence as well as an international presence as a residential real estate brokerage firm.
I believe this question came in when you were talking about the relocation of the offices to the new space. The questions are, how much is the new rent and is it a lease? You must know where you are going by now.
Well, we don't know where we're going by now. And so we don't have a new lease yet. Because we will not sign a new lease, we will not commit to relocation of space until we actually have a final and binding commitment from a purchaser for our office building, and we don't have that yet. We're still in the marketing process for the office building.
There are many churches like that Hokoloa Church picture that you had up earlier. How would you contend with the cemetery and iwi kupuna of these properties in order to do what you may be proposing?
Well, we need to know where the iwi kupuna are. If we, obviously the known grave sites would be preserved. We have no plans to do anything with those. I think if we were to develop some plan, if this was a property that everybody was in agreement needed to be put to a completely different use, I think we'd have to do an archaeological inventory survey where we suspect there may be grave sites to be sure that we know where the iwi kupuna are. And then we'd have to go through the full burial council process to ensure that if we move them at all, and I'm not saying that we would, that it would be done the right way.
What is the tax assessed value of real estate holdings? The slide went by too quickly to get the information.
Well, what was on the slide was a little over 300 million. That actually is what I took off of the last time I ran the whole spreadsheet using them, connecting to the county websites, was using 2018 numbers, so it's a little dated. But as I said, it's important to understand that it's very misleading because those county designations don't take into any of the factors related to the problems that we have with the problems, meaning things that might limit value in this case, such as the fact that there's a church use restriction or reversionary clause, that there may be grave sites on the property and all of that. If we were a for-profit entity, we would contest those tax values and appeal our tax assessments. But because we're nonprofit and we pay only nominal real estate taxes, it's not worth our time to do that. So we just let that stand.
How do we lose churches that were once under our umbrella? For example, the church left to the left and next to Kaloa Union Church on Kauai. I remember attending that church as a child and going to meetings and conferences with my mother.
That's a great question. You know, sometimes churches just drift away in our polity. Churches are, you know, autonomous. They have the right to decide their own destiny. We can't tell them to be members of the United Church of Christ. And they may have a different point of view and decide that they're parting ways with us. In other cases, the families move on. There's not enough people in the town to sustain the church, and the church as a local church, you know, or as an entity, as a body of Christ, kind of just ceases to exist. There's not enough people to sustain it. So we have properties like that, which are just empty. Sometimes there are nefarious reasons. There are people who move in to these properties. They know that as a polity, we're vulnerable to to outside influences, and they'll take over either the congregation and the governance and vote to leave, or in other cases that, if it's a local church that is not paying attention to their affairs, there could be somebody who jumps in and buys a property to tax sale or what have you. I wrote an article in the Friend on steeplejacking, which addresses sort of how a lot of these things happen, and some things that if you are coming at it from the local church side, you ought to think about from the local church perspective in terms of protecting their property.
You must have heard that both the Hawaii Island Mokupuni and the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches voted against the split from the Hawaii Conference Foundation from the Hawaii Conference United Church of Christ. Why haven't you met with both groups to provide your explanation for the split?
Well, I'm welcome. I invite meetings with those groups if they would like them. I have, in fact, we did a presentation just on Monday about the split. We've talked about it. We've had several conference-wide Zoom meetings open to everybody to talk about the bylaws issue on the foundation side. So there's been ample opportunity to discuss it over the 4 years it's been since the vote took place. But I want to come back to the root of the question, because it's wrong and incorrect to say that there's a split. We remain a ministry of the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ. We are an integrated corporation with the Hawaii Conference. Our board of directors will still be appointed in part by the Hawaii Conference of the UCC, and we continue to have a mission and purpose, which requires us to support and be a part of the Hawaii Conference. So I don't know how the narrative of there's a split and a separation got out there, but it's wrong. There's a restructure that's taking place that allows us to be a better fiduciary, to better comply with corporate laws, but we're not going anywhere. Our whole purpose is to support the conference and the mission of the conference, and that's what we will continue to do.
Will the process of returning church properties be outlined for the interested churches?
Absolutely, and every church who's spoken to me about a desire to own the fee to their own parcel, I'm engaged with and have provided copies of what's needed there, and basically because there is a trust relationship, and the foundation sits in the role of a trustee, we have to be sure that a church that would like to own title to its own property is sustainable financially, and for a long time will ensure that the property continues to be maintained indefinitely for church and continues to be part of our Hawaii Conference UCC family.
Are you familiar with the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches resolution passed at General Synod 2021, citing the illegal occupation of Hawaiian Kingdom church land and the recent federal case where Judge Kobayashi did not provide evidence that the state of Hawaii is operating legally in the Hawaiian Kingdom? With this understanding and treason committed by the officers in the Hawaiian Evangelical Association, which is not the Hawaii Conference United Church of Christ, how can you continue to ignore this treason? Are you aware that if you continue with this split, you and the Hawaii Conference may be liable under the Alien Tort Statute claims from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals?
Well, I'm aware of the resolution, to be sure. You know, to the extent that our attorneys advise us that we need to do things differently under the applicable laws that apply to us today, we would do things differently. But as it stands, I can't account for the past. I have to deal as a fiduciary and as a caretaker of what we have with the rules that apply to us right now. And at the moment, those are the rules of the laws of the state of Hawaii and of the United States. And if in the future we should be governed by the laws of the new Hawaii Kingdom, then we would comply with the laws of the new Hawaii Kingdom. You know, that's I don't know really what to say. It's a big political question, and really I'm just focused on property management and church.
Were the Pua Foundation lands specifically for sale or missions?
The Pua Foundation lands were given to the Pua Foundation out of the apology resolution. So it was a mission gift. And Pua is using them for their mission purposes. And it's actually a great time that, I mean, Pua Foundation is really, I think, a good example of a mission project, which is really living into, in my opinion, the apology resolution, in that they're trying to address some really systemic core root problems in our Native Hawaiian community, and to bring, you know, improve the lives of our Native Hawaiian community in very tactile and meaningful ways. So I'm pleased. I wasn't the director back then, but I'm pleased that the foundation was involved in being able to help Pua get its start.
We kind of ran out of time. In fact, we're a little bit over time. Thank you, Andy, for your presentation. I know there are a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but we will forward those to Andy, and he can respond directly to those who asked the question. So thank you again, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.